Owen, after 17 years, we're eliminating your position. That's what my boss told me, just like that. No notice, no appreciation, no handshake. 17 years of work, gone in under 30 seconds. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just looked him in the eye, nodded once, and walked out. Because the truth is, I'd seen this coming. Access permissions quietly changing. Meetings held without me, a new consultant in tailored suits whispering behind closed doors. They thought I didn't notice. They thought I was just some aging systems guy, replaceable, outdated. But what they didn't know was that I had prepared silently, completely. They didn't realize who they were pushing out or what I was about to do next. My name is Owen Riker. I'm 54 years old, and for 17 years, I gave everything to Meridian Technologies. Now they're about to find out what happens when you fire the wrong man and forget what he knows. What would you do if your company tossed you aside like that? Have you ever been replaced by someone who didn't know a quarter of what you do? Leave a comment, tell me your story, and stick with me, because this one ends differently. My name is Owen Riker. I'm 54 years old, and up until that Monday morning, I was the senior systems analyst at Meridian Technologies in Columbus, Ohio. For 17 years, I was the quiet guy behind the curtain, the one who kept the entire infrastructure running, from the days of dial-up through 3 full CEO transitions to full-scale cloud migration. I stayed when projects failed. I stayed when deadlines loomed over holidays. I stayed when half the team quit. I was the one fixing broken servers on Christmas morning and recovering critical files at 3 a.m. Because that's what being reliable meant to me. People don't notice the work when nothing's broken. They only notice when you're not there to fix it. Over the years, I trained every new hire, taught them how to navigate the maze of legacy systems no one else understood. I documented everything, kept backups of backups, designed security protocols tight enough that even our legal team once asked me if I was overdoing it. I wasn't. I remember when Meridian was just 2 floors in a business park. I started the same week my daughter Ellie entered kindergarten. Back then, our servers fit in a closet. Now they take up a climate-controlled room with biometric locks I could have left. I got offers, Google, Intel, even NASA once, but I turned them all down because loyalty used to mean something. Because I believed in building something and seeing it through. Because I thought Meridian was home. My wife Andrea used to joke that the servers were my second family. She wasn't wrong. When other people were chasing promotions, I was chasing stability. Then came Daniel. He showed up 5 years ago. Young, sharp-suited, MBA-toting, strategic thinker. Within 6 months, he started referring to us as IT resources. Instead of people, talked in boardroom lingo, streamlining digital optimization, tech-driven cost recovery, buzzwords that usually meant cut the veterans, hire cheaper replacements, outsource the rest. At first, I tried to help him. I explained how our systems weren't just code. They were layers of adaptations stacked over years of practical chaos. He nodded, smiled, listened. Then he brought in Jason Phillips. Jason was a consultant with expensive shoes and an even more expensive ego. Stanford MBA LinkedIn profile with phrases like digital transformation, evangelist. He and Daniel started meeting behind closed doors. Always quiet when I passed by. They weren't subtle. They weren't supposed to be. 3 months before I was fired, my admin access started changing. Tiny adjustments, permissions I no longer had. System emails I stopped receiving. Projects reassigned without a word. Andrea noticed before I did. "You've been quiet lately," she said one night on the porch. "Everything okay at work?" I lied. Said things were fine, that I'd seen transitions like this before. But this one felt different, calculated, surgical. I kept my head down, kept doing the work. Until I found the memo. It was a company-wide modernization plan that had never been sent to me. Jason Phillips would be taking over all tech operations. My name wasn't mentioned. My role gone. That same day, I ran a routine security audit, just one of those background tasks no one bothered with anymore. I found something small at first, a vendor I didn't recognize. Apex Solutions Group. I looked deeper. The money going out to that vendor wasn't pocket change, and the address a UPS mailbox. That's when I knew they weren't just cutting me. They were hiding something, and they assumed I wouldn't notice. But I did, and I started watching. I didn't say anything at first. No alarm, no warning. I just documented. Every invoice, every transfer, every line item pointing to Apex Solutions Group. It started small, 400 here, 900 there, but month by month it grew, 4,000, then 9, then 23. I cross-checked the dates. The payments lined up perfectly with our software license renewals. The systems were real, the vendors were fake. They'd found a way to siphon real money through real expenses with just enough markup to fly under the radar, and the approvals all signed off by Brian Wilcox, our CFO. A name I hadn't thought much about in years. He was the type who only showed up for quarterly calls and holiday parties with shrimp platters. But he held the keys to every dollar that left the company. I dug deeper. Apex Solutions was owned by someone named Thomas Wilcox. I found a LinkedIn profile with no picture, no job history, just a connection to one person. Brian, further digging on Facebook, confirmed it, his brother-in-law. They weren't even trying that hard to hide it because they didn't think anyone would look, especially not the guy they were pushing out the door. At that point, I had two choices: go quietly or dig in. I chose the second, not for revenge. At least not yet, but because someone had to hold the line. And I realized in that moment it was going to be me. I started pulling everything I'd stored over the years: backups, audit trails, access logs, flagged anomalies. I'd always been paranoid about system security. Now it was paying off. The more I uncovered, the clearer the pattern became. There was a full $8 million trail all routed through Apex, all signed off without proper secondary authorization, all happening under Daniel's watch. And the best part, no one remembered I still had access to the old audit interface I built years ago, the one legal requested during an old IP compliance dispute. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't integrated into our modern dashboards, but it was thorough, and it tracked everything. While I worked quietly at home, Meridian moved forward like I didn't exist. Jason Phillips had already moved into my old office. Younger employees started calling him JP. He wore tailored button-downs, used acronyms for everything, and started pitching restructures before even learning how the legacy architecture actually worked. One afternoon, I got a message from Steven, a junior analyst I'd mentored. "Sorry about how they did you? Owen Phillips is already rearranging everything. Feels like a total takeover." I didn't reply, just stared at the screen for a while. They thought I was out, that I'd disappear with a severance check and some hurt feelings. What they didn't realize was that I don't do emotional, I do precision. That night, I opened a draft email addressed to the board of directors, attached a report with full documentation, financial transactions access logs, and a list of questionable vendors. My finger hovered over the send button, but I didn't send it. Not yet. Because I knew how these things worked. The last thing I wanted was to be dismissed as a bitter fired employee with an axe to grind. I needed leverage, I needed timing, I needed Wednesday. Why Wednesday? Because that's when the board met quarterly, review bonus approvals, financial reports. If I could disrupt that, if I could force their hand, then they couldn't sweep it under the rug. So I waited. That Friday, I went to my bank and accessed a safe deposit box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were encrypted drives with copies of my earliest code bases, protocol drafts, and a full admin map of every system I'd ever touched at Meridian. They thought kicking me out of the building ended the story, but the truth was, I had just begun writing the second chapter Wednesday morning. I parked across the street from Meridian's headquarters, same spot I'd pulled into every morning for 17 years. Only this time, I wasn't going in. Instead, I sat in the driver's seat. My old company laptop open in the passenger seat, logged into a mirror email domain I'd quietly created years ago for internal testing. It looked official. It passed every SPF DMARC DKIM check. But it didn't live on any of Meridian's internal servers. They couldn't trace it. They'd forgotten it existed. At exactly 9:15 a.m., 15 minutes after the board meeting began, I sent a message to Daniel's subject line: financial irregularities, urgent review needed. The body of the message included a short clipped summary of the Apex payments I'd tracked. Nothing too elaborate, just enough to raise concern, but not enough to give myself away. I left out the connection to Brian Wilcox's brother-in-law, left out the bigger trail. If Daniel was involved, it would trigger panic. If he wasn't, it would trigger investigation. Either way, I'd learned something. By 9:45, my phone buzzed, Daniel straight to voicemail. His message was terse. Owen, we need to discuss the contents of your email immediately. Call me back. Now I didn't call. Instead, I packed up and drove to a quiet coffee shop 2 neighborhoods over. Sat in the corner with a window view, watched the world move. At 10:30 a.m., another message came in. This time from HR, Mr. Riker, we've received communication from you that may violate your separation agreement. Please cease contact with Meridian employees immediately. Further action may be taken. It was laughable I hadn't signed any separation agreement. They were bluffing, threaten, dismiss, silence. That was always the playbook. At noon, I visited my safe deposit box again. This time I retrieved a second backup one I hadn't touched in nearly 5 years. It held the original network security protocol documents from my time designing internal compliance systems, along with full logs of who accessed what, when those privileges changed, and most importantly, who authorized them. And guess whose name popped up just weeks before the Apex transfers began? Brian Wilcox. He'd personally requested expanded access to the vendor management system, a system that, up until then, he'd only had read-only permissions for. Now it was all starting to align. He wasn't just looking the other way, he'd opened the door. When I got home, I found 3 missed calls, Daniel Vanessa from HR and Jason Phillips. That last one was unexpected. I didn't think the polished consultant would get involved this quickly. But maybe they were realizing this wasn't just some disgruntled employee kicking up dust. Maybe they were starting to worry. At 2:37 p.m., a new email appeared. From Stephen, the junior analyst I'd trained, subject line, what's going on? Phillips just called an emergency meeting. Everyone's saying you sent a whistleblower message. They're revoking your credentials, even old logs. People are freaking out. Should I be worried? I replied with just 4 words. Don't get involved. Just watch. By 3:00 p.m., my landline rang. I hadn't used that number for work in a decade. Only a handful of people even had it. I picked up but didn't say anything. Owen, the voice said low and calm. It was Brian Wilcox. We should talk about your concerns. I think there's been a misunderstanding. So now it was a misunderstanding? I don't think so. I said evenly. There's a pattern in the payments. The board might want to take a look at Apex Solutions Group. And your brother-in-law silence. Then you're making a serious mistake. We can make this right, severance references, whatever you need. I hung up. 10 minutes later, HR emailed again. Suddenly, my severance had doubled. Attached was a brand new confidentiality agreement requiring complete silence on all company matters past and present. Now they were scrambling, and they still had no idea what I was holding. That night, I spread out all the pieces on my kitchen table: emails, financials, logs, vendor histories. A full picture, nearly $2 million quietly moved through ghost companies under Daniel's leadership and Brian's approvals. And yet I knew this wasn't the end. This was just the first act. Because if I was right, there were other companies, other vendors, and maybe Jason Phillips wasn't as outside this scheme as he wanted everyone to believe. I sat back, took a long sip of black coffee, and smiled for the first time in days. They had fired me. They had replaced me. They had underestimated me. But on Friday morning, their entire world was about to shift. Friday morning, the sky was clear, coffee was hot, and I had no place to be. For the first time in 17 years, there was no commute, no meetings, no ticket queue. Waiting in my inbox, I sat on the porch watching the world go by. My wife Andrea came out, kissed me on the head. Big day, she asked. I nodded. You could say that. At exactly 8:00 a.m., the first email went out. A scheduled message crafted in silence the night before delivered to every board member at Meridian Technologies, subject line, before you approve Q2 bonuses. Please read. Attached a 43-page report including transaction logs, vendor registration records, financial approvals, internal emails, and one flowchart that showed the Apex Solutions scheme from the very first payment to the most recent inflated invoice. The email was clean. No accusations, no angry tone. Just facts, undeniable, time-stamped, corroborated facts. By 8:17 a.m., my phone began to buzz. Unknown numbers, assistant names. I vaguely remembered from quarterly meetings. Voicemails from the office of board member Robert Chen, and I didn't answer a single one. At 9:00 a.m., the emergency finance committee session began. I knew the room. Same walnut table, same stale conference room coffee. Only this time I wasn't on mute. This time my report was front and center. By 9:32, Stephen texted me, "Police are here. Daniel and Brian being questioned in separate rooms. Phillips looks like he's going to be sick." "What did you do?" I didn't reply. Just stared out at the street, letting the breeze pass through. At 10:00 a.m., I finally answered a call. It was the general counsel, voice tight controlled. "Mr. Riker, this is Patricia Graves. We need you to come in to discuss the information you've provided." "I'm available by phone." I said, "There's really no need for in-person. I'm afraid this requires formal discussion." "No," I said, voice calm. "It doesn't. Everything I know is in that report, and everything I have is backed up in multiple secure locations." Silence, including copies ready to send to the SEC, IRS, and 3 major news outlets if anything happens to me or my family. Another pause. "Then the board is taking this very seriously. Several executives have already been placed on administrative leave. We would appreciate your continued cooperation." "I've cooperated fully," I said. "My part is done." Then I hung up at 2:15 p.m. I got a call from Robert Chen, a man I'd worked with during a system-wide security overhaul years ago. "It's a bloodbath," he said bluntly. "Brian confessed when we put the documents in front of him, tried to throw Daniel under the bus. Daniel's denying everything, and Phillips, he's panicking." I could almost hear the grin in his voice. "The board isn't buying any of it. We've frozen all bonus payouts. Forensic accountants are coming in Monday. Estimates are over $4. 5 to 5 million misappropriated." I nodded to myself. I'd been close. "The board wants to speak with you," Robert continued. About coming back, I didn't respond right away, because deep down, I'd been expecting that question. "They're creating a new role," Robert added. "Chief Information Security Officer. It reports directly to the board." "No more middle managers," I exhaled slowly. "I'll think about it," I said, and I meant it. That night I told Andrea everything. From the fake vendor to the internal cover-up, she listened without interrupting. When I finished, she just asked one question. "What do you want to do?" And I didn't have an answer. Not right away, because the revenge was done. The corrupt were falling. Justice had been delivered, not with yelling, but with documentation and silence. But returning to the same building that had once cast me aside, that would take more thought. Later that evening, I logged into my old LinkedIn profile. I hadn't posted in years, but I wrote one sentence. "Never burn bridges, just let them collapse under the weight of their own greed." And I hit publish Monday morning. The receptionist looked up as I stepped through the glass doors. She blinked once, then offered a polite, uncertain smile. "Can I help you?" I returned the smile. "Yes, I have a 10 a.m. meeting with the board." Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Name Owen Riker, pause. Then the subtle widening of the eyes. Her posture changed. "Respect now." "Of course, Mr. Riker. Elevators on your right, top floor. They're expecting you." I hadn't been to the executive level in years. Never had a reason. The IT office was 2 floors down, no windows, buzzing with server hum. Up here, the carpet was quiet. The silence, intentional. 10 board members sat at the long conference table, polished wood, bottled water. Robert Chen nodded once as I entered. The interim CEO, someone I didn't recognize, stood to greet me. "Mr. Riker," she said, voice composed. "Thank you for coming." I sat, said nothing. She cleared her throat. "The situation you've brought to light is unprecedented. The forensic audit team has confirmed nearly $2 million diverted over a 3-year span. Criminal charges are being prepared as we speak." Still, I said nothing, just listened. Robert spoke next. "The board has voted unanimously to create a new position, Chief Information Security Officer with full executive privileges. We'd like you to take that role." I didn't react. Instead, I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a single folder. Thick paper, tightly clipped, I placed it in the center of the table. Inside, I said, "You'll find my conditions." The CEO opened it. Her eyebrows lifted slightly as she read, "Full audit authority across all departments. Yes. Independent budget for compliance and security infrastructure. Yes, veto power over any vendor contracts involving technical systems. I nodded. Also, yes, she looked up. This is highly unusual. I met her gaze without flinching. So was embezzling $5.2 million under your noses. Silence. Then Robert leaned back, arms crossed, smiling faintly. You have until noon, I added. I have other offers. As I stood to leave, he called out, Owen, did you plan all this? I paused at the door. I didn't plan to be fired after 17 years. I looked over my shoulder. Everything after that was just me doing what I've always done. Identifying vulnerabilities and fixing them. At 11:47 a.m., my phone rang. They had accepted every single condition. 6 months later, my office overlooked the skyline of Columbus. A view I never asked for, but one I'd earned. Daniel was gone. Fired, indicted, still pleading ignorance. Brian Wilcox had taken a deal, pled guilty in exchange for cooperation. He'd do time. Jason Phillips fled to Brazil, but the extradition process had already begun. The money recovered most of it, enough to stabilize the company. Stephen now ran day-to-day. IT ops, I promoted him myself. The kid had potential, just needed someone who saw it. That afternoon, Andrea stopped by the office, smiling, holding a paper bag. Lunch, I grabbed my jacket, nodded as we walked through the floor. The chatter quieted, not from fear but respect. These people knew they'd seen what happened, and they knew I could have taken the whole place down. But I didn't. I saved it. In the elevator, Andrea squeezed my hand. Are you happy? I thought about it. The early mornings, the betrayal, the silence, the revenge. And I answered truthfully, I'm not angry anymore. I'm not chasing anything. I'm just complete. Outside, the October sun warmed our faces as we walked toward a little restaurant down the block. Halfway there, my phone buzzed. Text from Robert Chen. Board approved your budget increase. Unanimous vote. I smiled just slightly. Andrea caught the expression. What is it? Nothing, I said, sliding the phone back into my pocket. Just thinking about bridges. Bridges. Some collapse under their own weight, I said. Others, once repaired, are stronger than they ever were before. And this time I'd built it right. 6 months later, I stood by the window of my office, watching the sun dip behind the skyline. The city looked different from up here. Not just because of the view, but because of everything it took to get here. Meridian had survived the scandal. The systems were stronger. The culture still healing. But healing. We implemented full transparency protocols, third-party audits, new ethics training. Everything I wished we'd done years ago now under my direct authority. Every quarter I presented directly to the board. No middle managers, no consultants, just facts, data structure. People stopped asking where I'd gone. They started asking how we could prevent it from happening again. And that was the difference. Stephen had grown into a quiet, capable leader. He reminded me a little of myself 20 years ago. Curious, steady, loyal. Andrea and I started taking weekend trips again. First time in years, I wasn't too buried in crisis tickets to even consider it. Life felt less like recovery and more like ownership. One morning I walked past the spot where Daniel had once stood watching me pack up my box in silence. Now that office door bore a new title. Owen Riker, Chief Information Security Officer. But more than the title, what mattered was this. When people passed me in the hall, they didn't avoid eye contact anymore. They nodded, some smiled, some said thank you. Not because I'd brought down the corrupt, but because I stayed when it would have been easier to walk away. I could have burned everything down. Instead, I rebuilt it. And in that was something more powerful than revenge. That was vindication. Because in the end, they didn't just fire the wrong man. They awakened the only one who knew where all the wires were buried. And this time, I wasn't just the guy behind the system. I was the one defining it. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't destroying everything. It's rebuilding it stronger, smarter, and forcing everyone to see you in a different light. Not as the one who was cast aside, but as the one who still stands when the dust settles.